All right, we're talking about Qatar. So I think a lot of the time we talk about Israel-Palestine as if it's a conversation strictly about Israel and Palestine, as if it's a conversation strictly about, Hamas and the IDF. And I think that's a fundamental misread of the situation, because the truth is that this is a regional conflict in a lot of ways. That I think that this is, parts of this are religious and parts of this are economic. And so I just want to sort of break down, and this is going to be the first of perhaps a couple of videos. I'm probably going to do one of these on Iran as well. I'm probably going to do one of these maybe on Hezbollah, and potentially on the history of how Bibi Netanyahu got to power, a bunch of different ones. But this is going to be the first of that sort of series of videos. So I just want to talk about Qatar. Okay. Qatar is really complicated because some countries, our relationship, we can basically say, like, the United Kingdom is basically our friend. Canada is basically our friend. And you can say something like Russia is basically our enemy, right? Or Iran is another good example. Basically our enemy, right? North Korea. Qatar is a lot more complicated than that. And so this is long. I also have a lot of notes in terms of my footnotes here, which I'll this whole document is probably just going to be dropped into the bottom, into the what's it called, the thingy bobber on the bottom of the video. Where description, that's the word I'm looking for. Description is a very normal word. I should remember the word description, really. Anyway, with all that out of the way, I want to get into it. Okay, so America needs Qatar, and Qatar needs us. And it's a whole big thing because they're low-key kind of sus, and we hate them. So first, we're going to get into the component of, how they're useful and why we need them. So the first component I just want to go through just very briefly are military defense pacts. So I listed a bunch of these. So there's the 2012 General Security of Military Information. So basically I'm not even going to bother to read all the titles of this. You can see them yourself. But so this facilitates the sharing of classified military information between the two countries. Obviously not all, but some. We have an allowance as of 2013 for the U.S. and Qatar to share logistics, supplies, and services on a reimbursable basis. We provides a framework for sharing geospatial intelligence, enhancing the capabilities of both nations in surveillance and reconnaissance. We outlined broader defense cooperation aspects, possibly including joint training, defense technology, and sharing and strategic alignments. We've done very little of the joint training, but I believe we've done some, but I might be wrong on that, so I apologize if I am. Ensures compatibility to security in communications between the two countries. You can read this at your own leisure. What's relevant is that we do have some degree of a military apparatus between them. And this last one is the most important component, which is the enhancing cooperation in maritime security, crucial for maintaining stability in the Persian Gulf regions, right? So remember, the Persian Gulf is really important because it's a really important trade route because a bunch of stuff is coming through the Suez Canal. So there's a choke point. Specifically, obviously, in Egypt, where the Suez Canal is, that's the most important choke point. But this is why we've had, an issue historically with pirates in that region, right? And the reason that's a real problem is because there's so much that has to go through there, because that's the quickest way to get between Southeast Asia, where China is, where India is, and Europe, right? And so that's really, really important. Okay. The second component that we have, and this is again in the military world, is Al Udeid Air Base. I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but what's relevant is that it's the headquarters for the United States Central Command, so CENTCOM, which is coordinating U.S. military operations throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. So it's basically a primary hub for our U.S. Air operations, which is particularly important given our involvement with Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. So that's been really important for a very long period of time for us. The location provides strategic depth and flexibility for U.S. military operations, away from volatile areas, yet close enough to critical regions. So basically, this is a really important location in the world. This comes back to this maritime implementing agreement. This is really important. The Persian Gulf component is really important. But it's also just, at a generalized level, this is a really difficult place of the world. This is why people, Biden has said this before, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent her, right? And that's kind of true. And Qatar is arguably is slightly more important place in some cases. I'm not sure if I'm willing to say that because it's further away from Egypt. I'm not sure if I'm willing to say that. But what's relevant is that it's a very important location regardless. And so Anyway, it's key for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions in the region. People say this all the time, that it's important from a diplomatic perspective as a symbol of military and strategic cooperation. I think that's bullshit. I don't like that at all. It's a load of mayonnaise is what I wrote. I don't know why I wrote that. In my defense, I wrote that very late. It's already like, it's a little past midnight right now as I'm reading this, but I've been writing basically nonstop for most of the day. But anyway, so we'll get into it. But TLDR, we don't want them involved militarily in anything, but this is a different component of the thing. We're going to get to that section. Okay. Now I want to talk about our economic relationship to them. So our trade in totaled in 2022 a little over $9 billion. That's not a lot, but it's also not nothing, right? So trying to limit the amount, this becomes a soccer video, but they're also super important in terms of their sort of sports diplomacy. They've been doing a lot of sort of think about it as we're going to get into the reasons why they have a very sort of difficult sort of international kind of clout, if that makes sense. And so they're trying to protect their image by having a bunch of interrelations with sports. So they've like hosted the WWE and the AEW, and they're doing like, I listened to a podcast a while ago. I think they were like hosting like the furry conventions, like the international furry conventions and shit like that, right? Like they do all of this stuff. And the reason that they do all this stuff is because they want to make sure that they're able to, get into a better location and sort of get into a better sort of mindset in the international stage. And then it's also really important from a tourism economy perspective. And it's, obviously they're relevant in the financial perspective, but it's not primarily about finance for them. It's primarily about sort of getting clout. It's primarily a matter of like, changing the international community's views on them without having actually changed any policies. Okay, cool. Moving on, doing a lot of investments in real estate and financial services as well. So this is increasingly particularly a thing in New York and in Miami, but there's a lot of real estate that's being purchased up by international buyers just in general, but particularly in the case of Qatar, not exclusively Qatar, but Qatar is one of the larger buyers outside of China, is probably the largest. I don't know the exact statistics on it, but China's a very big buyer as well, as is Saudi Arabia, et cetera. Okay. So they've invested billions of dollars in U.S. companies and properties, including luxury hotels, shopping centers, and office buildings. Cool. The real estate component, in particular, is something that's on pace to grow substantially moving forward. So yeah, this is just true. It's not just true of Qatar. It's true across the board that this is an increasingly large component. And we can argue in a different video about whether that's a good thing, because arguably it's not necessarily a good thing from a national security perspective, and also from a perspective of like, hey, I want people to live in houses. The goal of a house is for people to be living there, right? But anyway, that's an argument for land value taxation. That's an argument for people to have community land trusts and all that stuff. But different video. We're not in that video. This is a different video. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that. This is not about Georgism. Okay, not everything is about Georgism. Most things are about Georgism, but this is not about Georgism. This is not about Georgism. I promise. Okay, it's not a Georgism video. Anyway. They become a really important education hub for the Middle East intellectual and financial elite. Okay, so this is actually more important, I'd argue, than even this component about the hotels and shit, and probably even more important than the soccer stuff. In terms of their education, when we think about sort of the, how we think about like what future leaders are going to be grounding their policy perspective in. It's not a perfect system, obviously. There's a lot of people who've gone to Western universities and turn out to become, very anti-West. See Jackson Hinkle, right? But I assume he went to an American university. I don't know if that's true, but I just wanted to insult him. But anyway, so there's a lot of people who do go to these universities. So there's a lot of campuses, sort of what are they called? Not pilot campuses, whatever the word is, but they're like secondary campuses in Qatar. So Carnegie Mellon has one that's my alma mater, so that it gets its own bullet point. But then there's all these other ones that don't get their own bullet point because they're not Carnegie Mellon. I'm not even going to bother to read them, but there's relevance. They do exist. Okay, cool. This is really important because it means that in terms of diplomatic future, this is one of the best footholds Western economic ties have with the Middle East above and beyond the ties of China and Southeast Asia is building. So again, this is not just a matter of like, part of this is certainly about trying to change people's political perspectives. That's definitely one component. And you don't have to do that like directly by like actively trying to change what is being taught in these schools, but just simply by having American teachers. There's sort of something implicit to that, right? But anyway, beyond that component, there's also this secondary component, which I think is perhaps more important and certainly much more likely to be much closer to a guarantee, if that makes sense, which is that when you go to American schools, the people that you know are Americans, shockingly enough. And as a result of that, when you start to be doing stuff in a business world, a lot of your ties, your business connections are going to end up being people who are likewise in the American education system, and therefore disproportionately are going to be Americans, or at the very least living in America. Okay, cool. Now let's talk about energy, which matters more than all of the other economy stuff. Cool. So in terms of liquefied natural gas exports, Qatar is one of the largest exporters of liquefied natural gas. The U.S. is a key market for Qatar's LNG exports, and these exports play a crucial role in meeting the U.S. energy needs. Okay. So we do a couple of things in terms of it and in terms of our relationship with them. So investments in energy infrastructure. Qatar has invested in LNG infrastructure in the U.S., including terminals and processing facilities. These investments not only facilitate the import of Qatari LNG, but also contribute to the broader energy infrastructure of the United States. In terms of security, this is not really a matter of like military security necessarily. It's more a matter of like balancing of powers, if that makes sense. So, the more diversified our sources of oil and natural gases are, the better off we are going to be, right? So, like you'll note that like particularly in terms of Saudi Arabia and Russia, they're complicated in some ways, right? So sometimes they're not exactly the best partners. So even though Qatar is also not the best partner, multiple not best partners is better than just one not best partner, if that makes sense. So mostly Russia, given that, not a big fan of Russia these days. Okay. That's also to a lesser extent true of like Venezuela, Nigeria, not so much Canada, Mexico, whatever. You can read. Okay. Joint ventures and collaborations. Okay. So there's a number of these. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these. So let's just go through them really quickly. So ExxonMobil and Qatar, I want to be clear, not all of these are American companies, but they're all Western companies. And so they're all companies that, even if they're not literally owned by Americans, they are companies that have a very long history of being very good trading partners with America. And so even if they aren't, we'll be able to have access to the results of their labor, if that makes sense, in a way that is not necessarily as much of a guarantee if we're talking about Qatar Energy itself. Okay, so ExxonMobil and Qatar Energy have announced a planned expansion of the North Field East in capacity from 77 million tons of oil extraction to 110 million tons by 2026. This is not remotely important, okay, but I needed to write this down, even though it's not remotely important, but I needed to write it down. Okay, this is what I needed to write down. Okay. ExxonMobil and Qatar Energy, apparently those are one word. Fuck that. No, they're not. Fuck you. They're not one word. They're two words. Exxon, space, mobile. Qatar, space, energy. Okay? That's stupid. And I refuse to spell it like that on the basis that, 1, it shouldn't be spelled like that, and 2, I don't like either of them. Okay? They're both terrible. Okay? But I wanted to flag that because I don't want someone in the comment section to be like, oh, quibbles, that's not how you spell it. Okay, fuck you. I know it's not how you spell it, but it should be how you spell it, okay? You need to be the change you want to see in the world. And the change that I want to see in this world is, 1, that ExxonMobil and Qatar Energy should probably go bankrupt. I want to be clear, not just yet, right? We need to, go over to renewable energies first. But once we're off to renewable energies and we no longer need these people, we should get rid of them, right? But that's number 1, not tomorrow. But tomorrow, okay, they should fix their fucking spelling, okay? This is such a small thing, but it triggered the ever-living shit out of me when I was researching this, okay? It was so upsetting. I'm getting sidetracked, but I was like, my blood continues to be boiling even after the research of that component of this video was like over genuinely like hours ago. But it's just like, It makes me furious. Okay, Qatar Energy. Also announced a collaboration with Chevron Phillips Chemical Company LLC to build Ras-Laffan Petrochemicals Complex. This is a $6 billion project focused on constructing an integrated olefin and polyethylene facility at Ras-Laffan Industry City. Okay. I got to be blunt with you. I got no idea what that means. So I researched it a little bit, very cursorily. Essentially, what's relevant is they're breaking down the raw oil into olefins. From my understanding, that's basically just means ethylene and propylene. It's like pretty basic chemicals, and then put them back together into useful plastic polyethylene. And it does this better than it used to be able to do this prior to this project, which means they can increase production. Okay. There are these other ones as well. Qatar Petroleum and ExxonMobil invested $10 billion in a joint venture, right? Joint venture between Qatar Energy and ExxonMobil again, in terms and Total Energy as well. There's another one, Qatar Energy and ConocoPhillips, also spelled wrong, have partnered to be part of a $28.75 billion expansion project. So yeah, what's relevant is they're really important in terms of oil. In terms of LNG specifically. Okay, cool. There's also technological exchanges. So again, looking at the universities, mostly this is in terms of the production and processing of liquefied natural gas. So that's their energy. That's like why we care about them. Okay. Now to the second component. Let me highlight this. Let me bold this. Why we hate them. Let me unbold this. It looks ugly when it's bold. I don't think it should be bold. Why we hate them. Okay. Domestic what the fuckery. I've split this into two basic categories. The first category is domestic what the fuckery. And the second one, if you scroll down, is international cringe other than terrorism. And then is the third one in the same section? No, the terrorism is in a different section. Okay. So yeah, this is the fuckery other than terrorism. Okay. I have to sneeze. Give me a moment. I no longer have to sneeze. Okay, cool. In terms of the domestic fuckery, domestic what the fuckery, rather. The first thing is arguably dictatorships are bad. I'm not going to go into that into too much detail. On paper, it's technically a semi-constitutional monarchy, but the reality is it's an absolute monarchy. It just is. Like they're just lying to you. It's not that. It's an absolute monarchy. Okay. So what I've broken this down into in terms of the domestic what the fuckery, other than the dictatorship is bad component, is there's the speech shit, there's the woman shit, there's the poor people shit, and then there's the gay agenda, in parentheses, legalize gay. So we're going to start with the speech shit. Okay, so there's the penal code's criminalized criticism of the emir. The emir is basically the king, defaming religion and spreading, quote, false news. This is, hear me out, bad. So the most important case of this is against Malcolm Bidali, highlights the risk faced by activists and the use of controversial cybercrime laws to suppress dissent. So a Kenyan security guard and labor activist in Qatar, this is Bidali, was forcibly disappeared by Qatari authorities and detained in solitary confinement for a month. Okay, this is just a sidebar, but I need to point out, solitary confinement is torture. Like straight up, solitary confinement is torture. Completely different video, but I just want to point that out before we move forward. So anyway, then charged under Qatar's controversial cybercrime law for, quote, broadcasting and publishing false news based on his online activities advocating for workers' rights. He was fined and had his personal mobile phone confiscated, and his social media accounts were blocked in Qatar. So that's really bad. Moving forward, the woman shit. Okay, in terms of the woman shit, the first thing that we're going to think about is women face severe discrimination under male guardianship laws affecting marriage, travel, employment, and reproductive health care. So, abortion, obviously very much illegal. Travel, you need to get your permission from either your dad or from your husband. Not good. It's very difficult for women to start a divorce. It's really bad. Family law discriminates against women in marriage, divorce, child custody, and inheritance. Women face intimidation by government, cybersecurity for expressing views on women's rights and political issues. This kind of leans back into the same issue as the speech shit. Okay, on to poor people shit. So there's two kinds of poor people shit. There's the citizenship rights and there's the labor issues. So a very large proportion of Qatari, this is true in Qatar, this is true in the UAE, a couple of other places as well. But in Qatar in particular, there's this issue of citizenship, which is to say that there's a very large proportion of people who are migrants who are not permanent citizens, even though they live there for many times, years and years at a time, but they're not technically citizens. So there's the discrimination citizenship laws affecting children of Qatari Qatari women married to non-citizens. So if you're a non-citizen Qatari, even if you are living in Qatar full time, your children are not guaranteed a citizenship of Qatar, even if their mother is a Qatari, which is obviously absurd. There's also this issue of kafala systems abuses. Actually, before I move forward, I really shouldn't have put that one. The discriminatory citizenship laws affecting children of Qatari women married to non-citizens. I shouldn't have put that in the poor people shit. It doesn't just affect poor people. It also affects expats. So there are a lot of American expats. I don't know about a lot of American expats, but there's a good number of both European and American expats. I don't know the exact numbers offhand. And so that's not exclusively a matter of people marrying migrant workers. I'm sure there's some amount of that, but there's probably a lower amount of that than there is people marrying Westerners. But anyway, so in terms of the kafala system abuses, migrant workers' legal status remains tied to specific employers, leading to exploitation and forced labor practices. So I've actually spoken to this about this with some of my friends who've lived in Qatar. There is a system where people take the passports often of employees, and they will hold them basically hostage. So it's sort of a semi-slavery system essentially, because they're not able to leave without permission of their employer. And so there's, that obviously results in forced labor in many cases. And it's very, very, very difficult for people to be able even to leave the country, let alone to change their job. Onto labor issues, which are sort of, connected to some degree with the citizenship rights issues. So inadequate public data on migrant workers' deaths related to heat stress. So keep in mind, this is the Middle East. This is news for you, okay? Climate change exists, shockingly, right? So because climate change exists, shockingly, right? As a result of that, it gets hot in the Middle East. It gets very hot in the Middle East, 120 degrees hot, right? Very, very hot. Obviously, that's Fahrenheit. That's not Celsius, okay? If it was Celsius, that would be a big fucking problem, okay? It's not Celsius, but it is still a big problem. But it's not as big of a problem. I just want to clarify it's Fahrenheit. Anyway, okay. In terms of heat stress, big problem. Despite some measures to protect workers, I think it was Johnny Harris. Someone made a really good video, maybe a year or two back, about this issue of heat stress and this issue of particularly the matter of they have on paper at this point made the Shura Council has made a bunch of labor reforms, but it seems that on the ground, the practice has not actually changed in any material way. On to the gay agenda, #legalize-gay. So homosexual acts, particularly between males, are illegal in Qatar with potential imprisonment of up to 3 years. Sharia law applicable to Muslims allows for a death penalty for homosexuals, although that has never actually been enforced. Just before we move forward, I want to point out the Sharia law component. So in terms of the Sharia law component, there are literally different laws for Muslims and non-Muslims. So that's just something that we want to flag as well. It's not a primary component of this, because I don't think, though it is certainly a problem, that it is quite as much of a problem as the women's issues and the gay issues. And the reason that I say that is because the proportion of people who are non-Muslims is comparatively low to the proportion that are gay, trans, and the proportion that are women. The government does not recognize same-sex marriage or civil partnerships, and does not allow campaigning for LGBT rights. Again, back to the speech shit. Trans women in Qatar can be arrested for, quote, impersonating a woman, often leading to detention without trial and forced conversion therapy. This is part of a broader policy of enforcing conformity to local social norms regarding gender and sexuality. Okay. So that's the reasons that they are doing fucky shit on a internal level, sort of within Qatar itself. Now let's talk about the international cringe, parentheses, other than terrorism. Okay, we begin with Al Jazeera. Okay. Al Jazeera, okay? This is very important. I'm going to look directly at the camera while I say this. Give me a second. I'm going to make myself big. I'm going to make myself big because it's very important that I be big. Hold up. I'm going to change the angle so that I'm right in the center. Are you ready? I'm going to look. Hold up. I'm going to move this to the center. Everything's going to be centered because this is a very important thing. Al Jazeera, okay, is a trash organization, okay? And I don't like them. Okay, and you shouldn't like them because they're a trash organization. Let's go why. Okay, we begin with the matter of anti-Semitism. So they claimed that Jewish employees were informed before the attack on 9/11. I have for all of these actually, I have a little thingy boober. So it's going to be in the comment section below. If you're curious about any one of these, you are more than welcome to look into it. So yeah, they claimed that Jewish employees were informed prior to the 9/11 attacks. That is obviously fucking bullshit. It's obviously not true. They also claimed that the Holocaust was exaggerated. Sharia and Life, this is one of their shows, hosted by Youssef Qaradawi, an Egyptian cleric, argues who argues, quote, clearly that I wrote this poorly. Who, quote, argues clearly and consistently that hatred of Israel and Jews is Islamically sanctioned. I don't know why I couldn't read that sentence. It was not actually that complicated a sentence. I wrote it fine. I just can't read. I'm incapable of reading. Okay. They also held an on-air birthday for Samir Kuntar, a Lebanese terrorist convicted of killing 4 Israelis, who was released in July of that year, later admitting that its coverage in Kuntar's release violated its code of ethics. Okay, continuing forward. There's a massive bias against Israel as a component of state policy in support of specifically Hamas, not the Palestinians in general. So it is true of a lot of Middle Eastern news organizations that they have a bias in support of Palestinians and in opposition to Israel. That I don't think is quite the same as specifically what Al Jazeera has, which is a bias specifically in favor of Hamas. So the most notable example of this is the one in 2009 where Farouk Kajumi claimed on the channel that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas had been involved in the death of Yasser Arafat, the chairman of the Palestinian Liberation Army. That was bullshit. Even at the time that it was said, certainly now, but even at the time that it was said, everyone knew that what he was saying was complete fucking bullshit. But it was said anyway in front of a huge audience, right? So not good. Similarly, this is a more recent example. They ended an interview with a Gazan resident mid-statement recently because he blamed the fact that he was wounded on Hamas for hiding among civilians. Yeah, so there's also, they have just a major component of the Islamist sort of position. That's sort of a generalized thing that they have always been in support of. So the Islamist position, I just want to be clear, is different than being Muslim. The Islamist position is the idea of Sharia law. It's this idea of that, like, basically no separation between church and state, essentially, but mosque and state rather than church and state. Okay. Sanction back channeling. So this is just a broad problem, right? When you think about what a sanction is America is like, okay, we're not going to do trade with this country, right? And the reason that we're doing that is because we're trying to punish those countries for their crimes, right? So when someone is back channeling behind that, when they're doing trade with those, when we do trade with them and then they do trade with the people that we're trying to sanction, it makes those sanctions much weaker, and it's a real problem. So therefore, Qatar shares the South Pars. I can't read words. Qatar shares the South Pars North Dome gas field with Iran, the world's largest natural gas field. Trades in trading commodities, energy cooperation, and maritime links. So they have a major relationship with Iran. Turkey. We need to take a moment. I'm going to show the importance of this matter. I'm going to take this out of the stand. Okay, I'm going to hold it like this, okay? And then I'm going to make myself big again, okay? Because this is important, okay? This is very important, and I need to be big. Okay. Turkey. This is a direct message to Turkey. Okay. Turkey. You're part of NATO, okay? If you're going to be part of NATO, okay, you got to get with the program, okay? You're not with the program. It's a problem. You need to get with the program, okay? And what it means to be getting with the program, okay, is hear me out. You need to make policy that is in support of NATO and not in support of the enemies of NATO. So let's go into that, right? President Erdogan is a very conservative and pretty intense nationalist. Okay, he's not the biggest fan of free speech, very similar to Qatar. And he's been getting involved in Syria and Libya and not just doing it what America wants him to do in either of those cases, right? I say America, I mean NATO, but let's be honest, I mean America. Okay, America's in charge of NATO. But the point is, so when Turkey recently, when they bought a Russian S-400 missile defense system, we were threatening to punish them with a nice little sanction, and Qatar was basically like, no, we're just going to continue to do our shit with Turkey. I don't know why I just wrote they. Maybe I was starting another bullet point, but I just wrote they. So I deleted it. Again, it doesn't actually matter that I deleted it because this is the whole point of the thingy. So I guess you won't see it when you see it in the comment section, but whatever. Okay. Russia. Not that extensive compared to Iran or Turkey in terms of their relationship with Qatar, but some of the following. So they have energy sector cooperation. They're both big time oil bros, shockingly enough. They've done some way smaller than Iranian joint ventures in oil and gas. Qatar's sovereign wealth fund also has invested in Russian companies. And also less important examples from a trade perspective, like Sudan, North Sudan, obviously. North Sudan is Sudan. South Sudan is an independent country now, but South Sudan was the original country, so they still call themselves Sudan, but they're North Sudan. Okay. At some point, you need to admit that you're no longer Sudan. You are now North Sudan. Okay. But they haven't done that yet. And in their defense, it hasn't been that long. So I don't know, maybe I'm okay with it for a little bit longer, but eventually you have to get with the program. Libya. Trade ties exist, but aren't that extensive. But we're going to get into the Libya issues when we start talking about the terrorism. The whole point of sanctions is to economically, I already said this part. Okay, cool. Qatar and Iran. This is. I was going to do this as a nursery rhyme. Are you ready? Okay, cool. It's gonna be a nursery rhyme. You're very excited for the nursery rhyme. Okay. Qatar and Iran sitting in a tree. TERRO ism. Terrorism. We're talking about terrorism. Okay, cool. Hamas. Okay. So in terms of political asylum, Abu Murzak. I think it's Abu Murzak. He's the deputy chair of the Hamas political bureau, and he's worth $3 billion, and he lives in Qatar. Also, Khalid Mashal and Ismail Haniyeh are both worth $4 billion, and they also live. They're both also leadership in Hamas, and they also both live in Qatar. They're major figures, not just in Qatari finances, but in Qatari politics in a lot of ways. So this is a real problem. In terms of financial assistance, Qatar has transferred more than $1.8 billion to Hamas, making it one of the key financial backers of the organization. It's also one of the only countries in 2007, along with Turkey, again, the least NATO-y of the NATO countries, to support Hamas after it was ousted by the ousted the Palestinian Authority from Gaza. And then again, Al Jazeera, very good coverage, including currently in the wake of October 7th for Hamas. Okay. Onto the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, political asylum. Again, Al Jazeera should not be trusted. Again, their financial and logistical support. Again, diplomatic backing, legitimization efforts, most notably in Egypt and Libya. And then, okay. So then specifically, as a result of all of this shit, in 2017, June of 2017, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Egypt all cut ties with Qatar, basically with no warning at all. Okay? So they closed airspace. They for land and for sea routes to Qatari vehicles and vessels. They accused Qatar of supporting terrorism, specifically the two named above, and criticized their at least comparatively close relationship with Iran. So, okay, in terms of Iran is like the big baddie of the Middle East these days. No one is allowed to sit with the cool kids table of Saudi Arabia if they're too close with Iran, because Iran is significantly worse than even Qatar in terms of the terrorism thing, in addition to the murder thing, as well as being Shia, which is a different type of Muslim than Saudi Arabia at all, Sunni, which Qatar also is Sunni, to be clear, or Sunni majority, and also their leadership is Sunni. And so, yeah, Saudi Arabia doesn't care for Iran very much. And so being a friends with Iran, like terrorism is like, everyone does a little bit of terrorism, but like being friends with Iran, that's a real problem in the eyes of Saudi Arabia and her friends. Okay. So there were also these other demands. There were 13 demands. So whenever you look up the things, it'll all say like, oh, there's the 13 demands, right? Most of these 13 demands don't matter at all. So I am going to read the rest of the 13 demands, but like the truth is they don't matter. So shut down Al Jazeera. Everyone knew that they weren't going to do that. They didn't do that. Cut ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. They didn't do that. Distance from Iran. They didn't do that. Close the Turkish military base in Qatar. They didn't do that. They actually expanded it. There's more Turkish troops now than before 2017. The other stuff also matters less. So like sever ties with the following non-Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas groups and formally declare them all terrorists. So that's ISIL, that's Al-Qaeda, that's Fatah al-Sham, that's Hezbollah. Stop funding designated terrorist groups, extradite terrorist figures. So again, that wasn't going to happen. Stop interfering in other countries' affairs, pay reparations and compensation, align the GCC and Arab countries, cease contact with opposition groups, particularly in Egypt. They didn't say that second part. They didn't say that specifically in Egypt, but like everyone knew that they were talking about Egypt. It's kind of like, imagine like a quote tweet on Twitter where you're like, you're clearly, everyone knows that you're talking about, Vosh, right? Your destiny, and everyone knows that you're talking about Vosh, but you don't say Vosh's name, because if you said Vosh's name, then it would be like, holy shit, you said Vosh's name, right? And you can't say Vosh's name, but everyone knows that you're saying Vosh, right? But you don't say Vosh, right? So it's basically that. So they were talking about Egypt. And then they also said shut down everything that isn't Al Jazeera, in addition to Al Jazeera itself. So I'm not even going to read them. But yeah, there's all of these other things, they do exist, but these are much smaller news organizations than Al Jazeera itself. Just to be clear, Al Jazeera also owns AJ Plus. For those who don't know, AJ Plus is part of Al Jazeera, so it's owned by the Qatari government. So there's also a time frame for compliance, and then there's a consent to compliance audits. This one is absurd. The consent to compliance audits. So basically what they were saying is, let's check in on you literally every month for the first year, then 4 times the second year, and then once a year for the next 10. Qatar wasn't going to say yes to this. Obviously, Qatar wasn't going to say yes to this. And it's like, the reason they did this, so it was sort of just to, bring up the pressure, sort of push up that sort of component against Qatar. But everyone knew that it wasn't actually going to happen. So in 2021, their normalization was able to be achieved. There was, I'm sure, a lot of things that happened behind the scenes that I don't have the ability to go into because I don't know them. But on the surface, nothing changed. But I would imagine that in terms of national security interests that are more secretive, and in terms of projects that we don't know about in the public, probably some things did change. But anyway, everyone's still mad at Qatar, except Turkey, the least NATO-y of the NATO countries, and also Iran. Okay, so with all of that, we get to this final question. So now what, right? We know that they're terrorists or supporters, right? We know that we kind of need them. We know that they're really useful in a lot of ways. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to maintain ties with them into the future. But while doing that, we need to decrease reliance on them. Looking at you, solar energy. Give me that wind farm, Daddy Musk. I want to clarify as we go down to this. Oh, shoot. This was a wonderful joke. Wait, can we go back and do the joke? Hold up. We have to go back and do the joke. Let me find that joke. Give me a second. It was a really funny joke, so we're going to go back to it. Where is the joke? Hold up. It's really funny. I know you've already seen it, but it's really funny. Here it is. Okay. We have to read this so we have the joke. Okay, not the video to be shit talking monarchy. Just wanted to vague post against the Al Thani family because I don't like Emir King, basically Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani's mustache. Okay, and then you scroll down and you're like, look, that's his mustache. Okay, we're gonna zoom in. Oop, that zoom did not work at all. Maybe I shouldn't have zoomed in. That was an error. Where is the mustache? I just want the mustache. Listen. I just want the mustache. We need to find the mustache. I found it. Look at the mustache. Look at the mustache. That mustache is an error. Listen, if you're going to be a man, if you're going to have hair on your face as a man, okay? That's fine. I have hair on my face as a man. Okay? But you need to have hair on your face. You need to commit. Okay? This is a bad look. Okay? Don't do this if you're a man. Don't do this at all. It is mustache, more like mistake. Okay? It is an error. Don't do it. It's a problem. What you should do is you should simply either be clean shaven or you should have both a beard and a mustache. If you have only a beard with no mustache, you look stupid. Okay? You look like a neck beard. And if you have only a mustache and no beard, okay, you look like Hitler. Straight up. You look like Hitler. Okay? That's what you look like. You look like Hitler. Okay? And I know you're going to say, oh, but it's not like a froopity boopity. It's like a frappity bop, right? And so because it's a frappity bop, not a froopity boopity, then it's not Hitler. No, fuck you. It still looks like Hitler. It's too much like Hitler. You shouldn't do it. And it's not even just that it looks like Hitler. It looks ugly. Okay? Hitler himself had okay, I shouldn't say that. No, I will say that. Hitler was attractive in certain ways. His mustache was not attractive, but there were other components just physically, okay? I'm saying this strictly on a physical level. Was an attractive man, okay? But that shit is ugly. It's ugly. Don't put that on your face, okay? Fix your face, my guy. Okay, anyway. So anyway, okay, but decrease reliance on them. We should decrease reliance on them in terms of our energy security. That's really important. So pressure a little bit more on the gay agenda and also on the hashtag feminism, that fully grown adult women should be permitted to leave the house, for example, without the permission of their father, TM, those kinds of things. But broadly, we should try to maintain ties with them into the future while decreasing our reliance. Okay. The second component is we need them to stop doing the terrorism supporting thing. So number one, Hamas must die. So I have a whole video about the future of Gaza, how exactly we should go about destroying Hamas, and specifically, not just destroying Hamas, but moving towards a trajectory where the Palestinian people in Gaza can be independent and have their own country and have an actual functional economy and all of that, and not, for example, have Hamas steal $11 billion from them, for example. And so also the Muslim Brotherhood must die. Al Jazeera isn't getting shut down anytime soon. I actually don't want to, but there should be a little floopity boop beneath all of their content and all their affiliated political pundits that explains who they are, that Qatar owns them, right? So YouTube already does this, but I think other organizations should also do it. I don't think it should be forced into American law necessarily, but I do think it's a good thing to see as a practice. And so I think we should be seeing it done more on places like Twitter, for example, X, Twitter. What? Can we just call it Twitter? It's so... Can we just call it Twitter? I'm just going to call it Twitter. It's just so silly. Okay, anyway. Okay. We should really be nice to Saudi Arabia, who, despite all the gay, woman, trans, poor, etc. people problems, is comparatively not terrorist funders right now. Push for a path towards better relations between them and Israel. So that is to say, Saudi Arabia and Israel, right? Because a Saudi and Israeli peace would mean that there would be a genuine Arab negotiator, Sunni negotiator on behalf of the Palestinian people, which would be really important in trying to decrease the tensions between Palestinians and Israelis. You should also pressure U.S. sports leagues to stop letting them buy influence, Qatar buying influence, and try to slow that already growing reach in Europe. But that's a losing game, pun intended. It was a poor pun. I'm sorry for that pun. That pun didn't land because I'm an expert on the sports as well as the balls. We didn't go into this, but sports washing is a major component of how they maintain international legitimacy. Anyway, this has a lot more in terms of like actual research and stuff and like footnotes. So if you're curious about any of these, they're all in the bottom in the description of this. So certainly look at that. Other than that, I don't know, like and subscribe. That's basically it for the video. See ya.